record. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 3 workshop for Elevation's Geospatial Summit. Bear with me one second while I find my notes. We want to send out a big thank you to our gold and bronze sponsors, Frontier Precision, Hexagon, Integrated Land Survey, Wyoming Geographic Information Center, and the University of Wyoming Geospatial Information Science and Technology Program, and One Spatial. Also, thank you to all of our presenters and instructors. We're using Zoom, where all attendees will be on mute. These sessions are being recorded. There is a Q&A option to ask questions of the presenters. There's also a chat feature, which should be used for technical issues and will only be visible to presenters and the host. If you want to speak and if the presenter opens up the session to attendee participation, please raise your hand and you will be unmuted. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our workshop instructors, Jason Caldwell and Jameson Quisenberry.
All right, thanks so much, Jeannie. Can you guys hear me there? I'm assuming you can, Jeannie.
Yep.
All right, let's share my screen here. All right, Jeannie, do you mind confirming that you can see that as well?
Yep, I see your screen and video.
Okay, we're off and running. Thanks so much for the introduction there. So appreciate everybody attending the webinar today. We're really gonna try to focus on the technical aspects of LiDAR. And just as a quick introduction to myself, I've been working with the Sanborn map company for going on 22 years now. I started as a photogrammetrist, and now I'm doing business development and doing the business development side of things for about 18 years. So it's been an interesting time. Obviously with COVID, we're not in person in Steamboat, which would have been awesome, but we'll try to make the best of it. So, you know, from my perspective, when we think about, you know, LiDAR technology and how it's evolved, you know, one of the things I always like talking about is the fact that when I first started working at Sanborn, you know, I actually had a quota I had to meet, which had to do with how many points I digitized per hour. And the requirement at that point was 1,500 points an hour. And it's interesting because today we're working on LiDAR technologies that are collecting well over 1 million points a second. And so when you kind of see that evolution, you realize that there's been a lot of changes over the years in terms of the technology, and really drives us to, you know, trying to figure out how to use this dense data set more effectively in our daily lives. And so really that's ultimately the goal today, is to look at ArcGIS and what its capabilities are, and show you some of the workflows that we don't necessarily use for production, but that we would expect our clients to use for, you know, utilization of the data sets that we provide. So I give myself a little bit of a quick introduction, but I wanted to give Jameson, who will have the harder part of this workshop, which is the second part of the workshop, to go over, which will be doing the on-hands components. So Jameson, if you want to give a quick introduction, go ahead.
Yeah, hello everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me. My name's Jameson Quisenberry. I'm a GIS analyst for Sanborn. I've been with the company for about 7 years now. Started out mapping out in the Middle East and worked my way into autonomous cars, and I have a background in you know, hydroflattening and environmental stuff like that. So I'm able to use a lot of the geoprocessing and product creation that I'm going to be demoing later today. So we should be able to get into a lot of what we're doing in terms of like the data sets, the visualization of the data, and the creation of terrains and all that stuff. You know, that should be a good start for me.
All right, thanks, Jameson. So looking at the agenda, we'll looking at this presentation, you know, we're going to go over what LiDAR is. The agenda today really is the first 45 minutes will be focused on a presentation like this to kind of talk and lay the groundwork for what LiDAR is, and things to think about when you're actually purchasing and using LiDAR, the quality levels, the different products that can be derived, the different type of infrastructure that you may need to have in place to be able to use the data is all important. And then the next 3 hours will be really focused primarily on the workshop components, where we'll do some hands-on review of different workflows as we move forward. With that said, what I would mention to everybody, if you want to try to follow along, especially on the workshop side of things, and do some of the work while we're doing it, we did provide the same data sets that we're using, we put onto an FTP site, as well as a PDF documentation. I would highly encourage you, if nothing else, to download the PDF documentation from that FTP site, because even after this meeting, you're going to be able to go through and work through the detailed instructions associated with what we're presenting today in the workshop. So if you look in the chat function of the Zoom meeting, Jameson actually posted an FTP location. So while we're going over this presentation, you might want to take a look at that FTP location and see if you can download that data. What I would mention is that when Jameson's going to be doing his portion of the presentation, we're not going to be sitting there waiting for everybody to produce the same products we're producing. But I thought it would be handy for you guys to have the same samples that we have, as well as the instructions for producing the workflows that we're going to present. And so that's why we wanted to give those to you. So feel free to download those at your convenience. And if you have any questions about access, just put it into the chat, and myself or Jameson can respond to that. So thank you for that. So in terms of the company overview, I'm going to hit this real quick, but several of the people on the call I think are already familiar with Sanborn. We are an ISO certified 9001-2015 company. That means that all of our production units, as well as administrative units, are following specific protocols that have been set up to meet the ISO standards. As part of what we do as a functional aspect for the business, we typically look at our business as this pyramid, as you see here, right? And the base of that pyramid is data and map production. This is typically what we're going to talk about today. How do we produce the LiDAR and what do we do with the LiDAR? But then there's all types of analysis that can be done, different software applications that can be provided, and that goes all the way up into what we call a decision support system. So these are the types of offerings that we provide to our customers. But just like any type of pyramid, you have to have a strong foundation of quality data to be able to do any of the other aspects that are built on that data. So a lot of our focus is data, and you'll be able to see that today. So, we are a company that's been around for many years. We've been around since 1866. There's an example of a map here in Wyoming from 1918 that we created in Gillette. It's always fun looking at these maps. I know on the historical maps that we have of Colorado Springs, instead of having parking spots, they have hitching posts for their horses, right? So to have a legacy like that is always fun to talk about. But that legacy has continued on for over 150 years. And Sanborn's been the first to do a lot of different things within the LiDAR space and within the remote sensing and GIS space. And so it's always good to be able to point those out and show that we've been at the front of a lot of these technologies over the years. We've also completed many different programs for state agencies, as well as federal agencies, as well as local governments. There are several people that are on this call today that we've done work for over the course of the years. So a lot of experience within Colorado, within Wyoming. Currently in Colorado, we're collecting and processing over 25,000 square miles of LiDAR data. So why LiDAR? We asked, okay, why should I select LiDAR over photogrammetry, over SAR, or any other technology that's out there to generate elevation data sets? And so there was some research that was done pretty early on when LiDAR started taking hand, and the research was done by the National Research Council of the National Academies. And basically what they found is they see that LiDAR is the best technology when it comes to penetrating vegetation, getting the densities and the accuracies that people are looking to achieve within DEM and DTM types of products. And so, initially that's how people wanted to use the data sets, was primarily to find ground. But as of more recent times, what you're seeing is a lot of people are using LiDAR similar to photogrammetry, and the fact that they're extracting out different types of feature classes and doing all kinds of different types of analysis, whether that's for electrical utility assets or for vegetation monitoring or for structure-based monitoring. Just as an example, we did a project for the city of Boulder where we actually extracted out 3D wireframes from a LiDAR data set and produced a solar envelope capability for that customer. So a good example of how you can use LiDAR for more than just ground elevation. But a lot of people are saying, okay, well, I have elevation data sets already, so why do I need to acquire LiDAR, you know? And so here's a great example of early on when we were talking about LiDAR technology, and what we were able to show our customers were the fact that when you're using a USGS 30-meter DEM in comparison to even just a 1-meter LiDAR posting, which is what you see here, there's a substantial difference of the fidelity and the quality of data sets that you can actually see. So, you know, words tend to be a lot stronger than, I'm sorry, visualization tends to be a lot stronger than words. And I think this definitely demonstrates how increasing resolution, increasing accuracy is obviously going to be able to help your business processes as you move forward. All right, so 3DEP, this is a term that a lot of you are familiar with. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of this program. This is a program that the USGS has been doing. And really, it's a funding program that they're trying to collect quality level 2 LiDAR data sets across the entire United States over an 8-year period of time. 3DEP really is a call for action to take the funding that the USGS has and use that in cooperation with the funding that commercial, state, and local entities would have to be able to make the dollars go farther and be able to collect the entire country. They've done a great job over the last 5 years in terms of building out the data sets that are available. And actually, for both Colorado and Wyoming, they're getting pretty close to fulfilling the requirements of collecting the entire state. There's only a few gaps left. So it's pretty exciting times to be able to get access to the types of data sets that we're going to work with today. And I just want to make sure people are aware of not only the 3DEP program, but the efforts that they've gone through to get to the level that we're currently at in terms of data sets in our region. Today, we're going to talk a lot about USGS-based specifications. There's been a lot of different specifications that have been released over the years. The USGS has done a great job in identifying specific requirements for testing accuracies, for deliveries, and things of that nature. This document continues to evolve. There's even updates that have happened over the course of the last several months to the specifications. So good document to be familiar with, even as a user. Obviously, as a producer of this data sets, we're very familiar with this, but we always like to share this information with our user community as well, because there's a lot of great information within the document that talks about specs and things of that nature. All right, so what is LiDAR? LiDAR uses really 3 primary technologies. It uses lasers, which is basically a rangefinder. So the laser has the ability to capture the amount of time it takes to essentially be emitted from the laser head and then reflect off of whatever it's reflecting off of and come back to the aircraft. So based upon that amount of time, we're actually able to compare that or combine that with other information, which includes GPS information, which gives you the X, Y, and Z of that laser point, as well as inertial measurement information, which gives you the yaw, pitch, and roll. So really, it's very similar technology when you start thinking about the mathematics behind it to what we're doing with photogrammetry, except for it's faster and tends to have a much higher density than what we typically would see with photogrammetry. Laser rangefinders can be found on any types of capability or vehicles these days. We're primarily going to be talking about airborne today, but Sanborn actually uses mobile platforms, as you see in the van down there. And actually, we also have an autonomous robot that can drive inside buildings and collect LiDAR point clouds. And so LiDAR really has evolved significantly these days. We're not really talking about autonomous vehicles in this presentation, but what we've seen in the autonomous vehicle space is that they're putting LiDAR mounted sensors on all vehicles for autonomous placement. So it's a pretty interesting time when you start thinking about what LiDAR is. So when we think about collecting from an airborne solution, the LiDAR capability does not, you know, in of itself, when it's collecting the points, understand the difference between ground, vegetation, structures, you know, or even cars, right? So anything that is underneath the aircraft that essentially has a capability of responding off of the terrain or other features, even another aircraft that's flying underneath our aircraft or birds or anything of that nature, you can get reflections off of those, right? So the goal that we have, and you know, for Sanborn when we process this data, is to provide intelligence to the data sets to essentially segment the data sets into different classes, so that when we deliver to our customers, they can say, okay, these points are ground, these points are vegetation, for example. I do have this image on the right. This is trying to explain that when a single pulse is released out of the sensor and goes towards the ground, it actually has the opportunity to break apart, right? So what you can have is the first components of the pulse hit vegetation or canopy, and then the remainder of the pulse filter down through and actually hit ground. And this is from a single laser pulse. So you can get multiple elevations from that single laser pulse, and then taking that information into our processing is where we can get the intelligence to show that we have vegetation or ground or other types of features, depending on what the requirements are. So when Sanborn looks at LiDAR processing, what I wanted to show you here is kind of the project planning, what we do for acquisition, calibration, all the way through final product generation. It's a fairly sophisticated process, but the black boxes that you see on this graph here are the primary functions associated with the steps in producing quality LiDAR data sets. So this always gives, I think, a great overview in terms of understanding what it is that we are doing when we're actually collecting data and then processing it through. It allows you to understand, what different types of features we're collecting at different times. So a few overview items I wanted to cover for system and aircraft configuration. LiDAR density and data accuracy is really based upon several variables, right? So typically the flying height of the aircraft, the speed of the aircraft, the speed of the actual LiDAR sensor you're using, and then the field of view of the LiDAR sensor all play a role associated with the amount of density and accuracy that you can achieve from collecting LiDAR. So when you're thinking about flying height of an aircraft, the lower you're flying, the more density you're going to get in terms of LiDAR point cloud. The speed of the aircraft, the same thing holds true. So the slower you travel in terms of the speed of the aircraft, the higher the density. The faster you travel, the lower the density. And then you have the speed of the sensor itself, the LiDAR system itself, typically characterized in kilohertz. These systems, when I originally started working with LiDAR, we were collecting at 5 to 10 kilohertz, and now we're collecting over 1 million kilohertz in some situations. So it's pretty crazy to think about collecting 1 million points per second, but you can actually change this component on the system so that you can tailor the speed of the sensor to the specific requirements of what the client is looking for. And then the last aspect has to do with the field of view. And so if you look at my hands, I don't know if you can see me actually, you're probably looking at my screen, but the field of view simply is the angle of which the actual sensor is collecting information on the ground. Typically, that's going to range anywhere from a 40-degree field of view down to a 10-degree field of view. Again, the more narrow the field of view, the higher the density of the point cloud. So the higher the density, meaning the lower we fly, the slower we fly, with the highest speed of the sensor and with the most shallow field of view, would essentially give us the highest density that we could capture, but also would cost the most. So those are the things that we always look at. Okay, what's the most efficient way to collect the data to meet the client's needs? And that's usually what most vendors are looking for is, okay, how do we get to the client's needs without over-engineering and over-collecting it, but also still achieving the density and the quality that the client is looking for. There's also environmental considerations that you got to think about. The LiDAR systems are active systems, meaning that you don't need light from the sun to produce data, which is different than photogrammetry. Typically, photogrammetry, you would have to fly with a 30-degree sun angle. The one thing I would point out is that we do fly LiDAR with an optical system sometimes. If we are flying with an optical system, obviously it's recommended that we would fly within the sun angle requirements. However, if we're not flying with an optical system, we can fly day or night and still get quality of data with LiDAR. Leaf on or leaf off, it is application dependent. What most of our clients are looking for when they're looking at ground applications is typically a leaf off. The one thing I would mention though is that the LiDAR sensor has gotten really good at penetrating vegetation. And especially when you're looking at Western states like Colorado and like Wyoming, leaf off versus leaf on considerations can be somewhat flexible typically because the density of vegetation is limited in comparison to a lot of the places we see in the east. However, we do have applications where clients do desire leaf on because there's a lot of different canopy applications that you can tie to the LiDAR data sets. And so some of our clients do prefer leaf on collections for those reasons. Other things to think about: summer, spring, fall, or winter. Obviously, being in Colorado and Wyoming, we know that there's different seasons. And right now, we're about to break records for 90, 100-degree temperatures here in the Front Range. But give it 3 months, and we'll have our first snowfall. So collecting LiDAR during snow seasons is okay if you're interested in understanding the snow and what the snow is doing, but you can't penetrate the snow to ground if you're collecting in the winter. And so those are considerations to consider. Spring is the same issue, right? We get a lot of thunderstorms in the spring, as well as potential for late snow in a lot of our regions. And so obviously we got to think about that when we're collecting. Most of our clients do want to collect in the late spring for LiDAR. We're doing a lot of collections now that are late spring moving through the summer because of the fact that they're fairly large. We're getting densities onto the ground, so we're not as concerned about the vegetation, and it allows for our customers to have a secondary use case, which would be for vegetation applications. The other thing to consider is clouds. We're not really worried about cloud shadows like we would be if we were collecting with an optical or an imagery sensor. However, we have to be below the clouds to be able to collect LiDAR data. If we're above the clouds, there is the potential for the LiDAR to actually respond off of the actual clouds themselves, and you wouldn't have a very good data set. So early winter, early spring, due to potential snow coverages, is a challenge within this region, obviously. All right, so when you're planning for a project, looking at specifications, right? Where's the location? In Colorado, Wyoming, there's some pretty big obstacles that we have to think about. Terrain relief is one of the biggest ones, right? If we're flying here in Colorado Springs, where I'm sitting at, and we have to fly from 6,000 feet to 14,000 feet, obviously there's some considerations we have to make to be able to make sure that we collect at the densities and at the quality that people are looking at. Typically what that means is we're flying with more overlap, we're flying with lower flying heights to make sure that we meet the densities where there's a lot of terrain relief within a specific flight line itself. The newer LiDAR sensors are pretty amazing in terms of what their capabilities are. As you can think about terrain as we're flying the aircraft over terrain, if the terrain is coming up towards the aircraft and our aircraft is essentially at a single flying height when it's flying, we're actually losing field of view as the terrain is coming up towards us. And so we have to make sure that we're within tolerance and that our field of view has the capability to essentially make sure there's no gaps for the adjacent flight line. And so when we think about this, a lot of what we do is make sure that we stop flight lines and then come back and overlap those flight lines and actually fly a little bit higher so that we're staying at the same field of view. Again, the newer LiDAR sensors have some pretty awesome capabilities to be able to, on the fly, understand the type of terrain that we're dealing with and actually change the field of view based upon the terrain on the fly so that we're not having to stop and turn and come back at a higher altitude. So it's different things that we think about when we're doing flight planning. Terrain relief is a big one. The schedule that you require, how quickly does it need to be delivered? Quality level, this typically ties to both accuracy as well as density. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Just as an example, a lot of people get a little bit confused between the difference between a quality level 1 and quality level 2. Both of those products have the capability of generating and meeting an accuracy for 1-foot contours. So a lot of people think of QL1 meaning that it needs to be collected at 8 points per meter to create a 1-foot contour, which is actually not the case. Even at a quality level 2, which is only at 2 points per meter, we do have the capability of generating that. So being familiar with what and how you're going to use the data and understanding what your budget is in comparison to the quality of the data set that you need is a very important aspect of really planning for your program. And then thinking about legacy and outdated standards, this is going to become very important as we move into 2022 and NGS is releasing their new system. Base station requirements are something that we see in a lot of RFPs and with a lot of the different technologies that are available today for cores and real-time capabilities. We don't see the base stations needing to be distances and the numbers needing to be spec. Let your vendor tell you what they can achieve with their technology. Survey control and checkpoint requirements. The checkpoint requirements are defined really well by the USGS specifications document. However, the survey requirement is dependent on experience of the LiDAR vendor that's providing it. So allowing them to have some control over what they would recommend is always a good idea. And then what type of file delivery are we going to deliver in, and what type of coordinate system are we going to deliver in, right? Custom coordinate systems always are challenging, as you guys are aware, I'm sure. And so trying to see if there's a way to tie it to one of the standard coordinate systems that are used is always a recommendation that we would have. All right, so just as an example, I wanted to kind of show you what I was talking about, the difference in quality levels and densities and what we have to do from a flight planning perspective. So what you see here is a project that on the right-hand side, I have a flight plan. You have green lines that are actually for quality level 2, and then the red lines are for quality level 1. What I wanted to point out here to you is, just so you understand, is for quality level 1, because we have 8 points per square meter density, we're having to fly our flight lines closer together. And really what's happening is we have a more shallow field of view, and we're flying lower for a quality level 1 than we would for a quality level 2. And the best way to demonstrate that is with this graph on the side here, showing the lines and how close they have to be in parallel. Here's another way of demonstrating that exact same thing. As you can see here, the blue lines, this is more of an isometric perspective, right? So the blue lines are showing the flying height. These blue lines are actually for that quality level 1 area. This is the same project area I was just showing in the previous slide. And then these blue lines here are for the quality level 2 area. So you can see these are being flown at a higher altitude than these ones are. The other thing to point out is you can see that these lines right here are actually being flown at a little bit higher altitude than the lines on the outer edges. And the reason for that is there's a lot of terrain within this area right here. And so because of that terrain, we're having to change the flying height to meet the requirements and try to maintain the densities. So when you look at flight plans from your vendors, this is something that we always like to point out and make sure that you're familiar with, so you can kind of have an understanding of what we battle when we're actually trying to collect the data to meet the specific requirements, especially if there's terrain involved. So one of the things that we always do, and all vendors should be doing, is calibrating their LiDAR systems. Typically, we have what we call a bore site. This is over an area near Colorado Springs, where we have established ground control layout, and then we go and actually fly pre and post mission flights within this area to make sure that our sensor is staying within the spec that it needs to be. So this is always something that we provide to our clients in a LiDAR report. It shows that bore site that was completed prior to the data processing. Other things to consider when you're doing collection is the SPEC QC and what we call PDOT. So this is all about satellite constellations for GPS and making sure we have the best solution possible when we're collecting the data set. So we keep an eye on this and look at the forecast for the KP indexes, making sure that we're going to have the allowances that we need to be able to collect. And then we actually do some post-processing to make sure that we're within an average of about 5 centimeter separation. So GPS really is the foundational component of making sure that we meet the level of accuracy that we're contracted for. And so this aspect of what we do from a data collection perspective is always highly important. All right, so when you think about planning, point density is one of the biggest questions that we get asked, right? Understanding the technical specifications that are needed to be able to meet the minimum requirements. What quality level do I need? Do I need to leave on, leave off? Do I need to collect any other data simultaneously, like imagery? This was out of a presentation that the USGS had provided. And really what they're showing there is 2 different quality levels. You have a quality level 1 on the left and a quality level 2 on the right. And it's pretty obvious when you look at the data set that there is a little bit more detail in the quality level 1. And again, it's because there's more points on the ground. There's 8 points per square meter on the image on the left, whereas the image on the right would be 2 points per square meter. So if you're talking about trying to extract building rooftops, for example, for a solar application, you can easily see why you would have better results coming from a quality level 1 product versus the quality level 2. All right, so do you need higher density? That's always kind of the biggest question. The USGS typically, what they're flying is quality level 2 for most of the United States. We do know that a lot of local communities are interested in acquiring at higher densities at 201 or even more. I can tell you that for most of our utility customers, for example, we're collecting at 20 to 50 points per square meter because of the types of features that they're looking for. So it really is based upon your use case and what your needs are. And that's going to drive the density that you need. Again, the higher the density, the higher the cost. So something to consider that, everybody wants more data. Yeah, that's great. But does it meet my needs, and do I have a budget for it, are always the two biggest questions that we think about. This image here on the top right gives you an understanding of the types of point densities that we're dealing with. QL0, QL1, QL2, and QL3 are shown there. When we look at that, what you're seeing there is QL1 is 8 points per square meter, and QL2 is 2 points per square meter. These are the traditional data sets that we're seeing federal, state, and local governments wanting. However, we are starting to see some interest in QL0 data sets that would exceed an 8 point per square meter level, as well as increase the accuracy. QL3 we haven't seen very often. However, this would go back to something like 1.4 meter posting and something of that nature, and a 15 centimeter type of accuracy. So on the bottom screen here, what you'll see is a cross section of a LiDAR point cloud that's been classified. The first image there is a QF3 image. I'll just point out that we have brown, which is the ground, we have red, which is structures, and then we have green, which is vegetation. And so we have the exact same data set here as a QL2. So switching back to a QL3, going to QL2, you see you're getting more density, you're getting more points within features like structures. And then going to a QL1, again, you're seeing a lot more density on the ground, especially under vegetation, and also on structures itself. So I always like showing people this because this gives you a kind of a good understanding of what will be seen within the LiDAR point cloud and the types of densities we're working with based on the quality levels that the USGS has listed. All right, so the other thing to think about when you're planning for a project is what classification do I need? Typically, the USGS base classification is shown here. This is actually an outdated table. I need to update it to the most current version. But in general, bare earth is what a lot of people are looking for. Hydroflattening and water classifications, as well as bridge decks, are other items that are typically also in the classification. So this is typically what I would consider the minimum classification that most USGS projects require. However, as you can see on this table on the bottom here, there's also vegetation classes and building classes that could be added. A lot of people these days have interest in extracting building out of the LiDAR data set because it is a fairly efficient way of doing that. And it also gives them a complete 3D rendering of that building. The other thing I'd mention is that there is capabilities of customizing these classes. So if there's specific features that you want to extract out that aren't shown just on this base set that I'm showing here, there is a lot of ways to essentially add additional classifications if you'd like. Just as an example, most of our utility customers have upwards of 100 different classes that they're looking for within their LES file. So what is it that you're going to be doing with the data is important. If all it is groundwork, a lot of the work that we do for wildfires, for example, what they're looking for is moving ground around to essentially create bare plans for reducing runoff and things of that nature off the wildfire. So it's really focused on the ground only, then that's fine. You're probably good with the base classifications. But if you want to do anything beyond that for vegetation, for structures, or anything else, thinking about the other classifications is important. Again, the thing to point out here is the more classes that you have, the more features you have, the more the cost. So that's always the trade-off is what am I going to be doing with the data sets versus what do I really want and what's my budget? So trying to figure out how that fits, within your project is important. All right, so this is just showing some examples of point classification. So what you're seeing here is ground and non-ground. The brown here, these are LiDAR points, right? The ground is shown in the brownish orange color. That's the ground. And then you have the gray, which is non-ground. So that includes vegetation, structures, even some cars in some places. So this is traditionally what the normal USGS requirement would be for most projects that we've done with them. However, we do have clients that want to go beyond that and they want to classify to the structure and vegetation class. And so that's kind of what you're seeing here is the structures have been pulled out and then you have all the other classes within one class, which is the vegetation class. All right, so do you need imagery with LiDAR? That's always a big question that people have. And we can co-mount LiDAR with optical systems and fly them simultaneously. What I would say is those optical systems tend to be smaller footprints. And so if it was just being collected for ortho only, it would be more expensive. But when you co-mount them, you're getting essentially a single flight and you get to collect both an ortho photo as well as LiDAR data sets. So what you're seeing here is the type of product that's been fused. So this is actually a LiDAR point cloud that has an RGB value tied to each individual point. And so it almost looks like an oblique image, but it is a point cloud in this case. And actually, Jameson is going to be showing some examples of this within his segment of the presentation. Other things to think about for planning purposes has to do with retrieval, data viewing, and training. What we find typically is that this is not something that most of our clients are particularly thinking about when they're buying these types of data sets. And so we always like highlighting this to make sure customers are thinking about how are you going to be able to ingest this data and then really empower your end users to use the data, right? Most of our customers, they're really administrating the data sets and providing those data sets back to other users within the government or the commercial side. And so how do you make sure that they have an easy way to access the data, view the data, download the data? So something to think about. I don't want to make this presentation too much of a sales pitch, but Sanborn does provide these types of capabilities to our customers. We're doing a project right now for the state of Michigan, where it's a complete clip and ship for the entire state. We just completed the entire state of LiDAR for that client. And part of their struggle was the fact of how do they empower their end users to find the data sets without having to call them for every single time they want to download or access data sets. So we've given them not only the capability to essentially search for data sets, but also view those data sets in an online platform, do some analysis there, but then also have the ability to clip and ship within whatever format, within whatever CRS that they're looking for. So it really maximizes the ability for the end user to get access and use the data, which we feel particularly is important because if people aren't using the data, you know, to try to go out and secure funding for getting an update to the data down the line could be challenging because no one's using it. So we want people using the data, which is always an important aspect of geospatial work. So. All right, so what is required for deliverables typically for the USGS base specification? Typically that's a LiDAR point cloud, a bare earth raster elevation model, first return intensity raster, break lines, and FGDC metadata. So these are somewhat standard deliverables. Most of our clients, even if it's not associated with the USGS, would have this requirement for deliverables. But there is other things we can think about. We already talked about the idea of adding different classes. So an example here, snow, temporal inclusion, things of that nature. This is the baseline as the USGS has defined it. So, you know, classification schemes for hydroflattening and the water bodies, as well as for the ground and above ground features are all understood, and additional classes can be defined. All right, so when we're talking about LiDAR base specifications, one of the things we always like making sure people understand is the absolute accuracy. You know, what's the accuracy of the data sets that we're delivering? Typically, again, QL2 and QL1 data sets are the primary data sets that are being delivered these days. And both of those data sets have the same level of accuracy, both from an RMSE as well as a 95 percentile. So it's a 10 centimeter RMSE. And this is why I was stating that the 1 foot contour can be generated from either QL2 or QL1. There is no difference in accuracy in terms of the vertical accuracy of the data set. There is a difference in resolution, which does drive what you can do with the data sets. But in terms of a contour interpolation, either one can be used to figure that out. So there is a relative accuracy review now with the USGS. And so things that we do to make sure that our line to line and building to building are within tolerance. We monitor that. We actually run QC functions on that. On the bottom left corner here, you can kind of see an example of that where we're actually looking at the ground. Typically is where you want to see that. You want to see from one line of flight to the next line of flight that those two LiDAR data sets are in alignment. And typically you're looking at the ground for that, not above ground features. So the green is showing good alignment. The red is showing bad alignment. In this case, all the red is actually at the vegetation height and not at the ground. So it makes sense that that would be showing that. So we go through this and we provide reports back to our customers as well as the USGS to make sure that they see that the relative accuracy within the data set is of high quality. All right, so there's other requirements associated with most of our projects these days, which have to do with vertical and horizontal accuracy testing. These days, we have what we call a NVA and VVA. NVA is non-vegetated areas, and VVA is vegetated areas. There is specific requirements within the USGS documentation for the amount of checkpoints that have to be collected to meet the minimum requirements. These checkpoints essentially are providing feedback to us as well as the user community of the data set that say that the accuracy of the data has met this requirement through this type of standard. So if you have more questions about that, definitely reach out to us. We'd like to talk to you about that. This is a very important step for all geospatial data so that you know what you're dealing with in terms of the quality of the data set. So I'll continue on here. This is just kind of showing a crosswalk. There has been changes over the years in terms of how NVA and VVA have been reported. In the past, we've seen FEMA documentation as well as other documentation that had it broken out into 5 or 7 classes. Those 5 or 7 classes have essentially been resolved down to 2 classes now, which is the NVA and VVA. So you can kind of see the crosswalk here and what that looks like. The NVA being non-vegetation typically is in open bare earth terrain or urban areas, asphalt, concrete, whereas the VVA typically is going to be within the vegetation classes that we typically had out there, tall grass, tall weeds, brushlands, and forested areas. All right, so when we're thinking about raster-based DEMS, these are derivative products that are being provided as part of deliveries for most of our clients. The USGS, again, has done a great job in their specifications document to outline what the minimum sales sizes are based upon meter and feet. So again, at QL1, typically you're actually creating a raster DEM product at a higher resolution, whereas at QL2, we're generating that same product at a slightly lower resolution. Hydroflattening enforcement. There's not a ton of water in the West, but there's still some requirements for this. One thing that we always like to point out is that the USGS has specific requirements built into their base standards that require hydroflattening for 100-foot wide rivers and streams and 2-acre water bodies. And when we get into the West, what we find is that 100-foot wide rivers and streams is actually fairly rare. There's not a lot of those in Colorado. And so a lot of our clients are specifically looking at having their drainage collected at a higher resolution, which in this case would mean that the width of the river or the acre body would be reduced so that it's being collected. Just as an example, we're doing a project right now that's in cooperation with Dr. Cog and the USGS. And for that project, the entire Platte River within that project is going to be flattened, even though there is sections of that river that are well below the 100-foot width. So that's just one example of how that can be done. Again, the more features that you want to capture within the hydroflattening, the higher the cost. So just kind of consider that when you're thinking about it. Everybody would say, hey, I want every river or every stream hydroflattened, but in most cases, the smaller streams likely don't require them. So one of the things that we like talking about is making sure that people understand the difference in terminology between hydroflattening versus enforcement. So when we talk about flattening, really all we're doing there is making sure that for the streams and water bodies that it's flat and it's flowing downhill. When we talk about hydro enforcement, what we're really talking about there is actually cutting the terrain for culverts and bridges and such so that the water can drain through. So I have a graphic here kind of giving you an explanation of what hydroflattening looks like. What you see here is just a raster with LiDAR points. And then here, what you have is the tin that's created from that. And typically what you're seeing within LiDAR data sets on water bodies is the fact that you have some undulation within that water body that doesn't allow you to essentially show that there's a downward flow to that stream. So we correct that so that the water body's flat and is flowing downhill. This is an example of what I'm talking about from a monotonistic standpoint. On the left, the drain is flowing downhill from the highest point, which is in the top right, to the lowest point on the top. Sorry, the bottom right, top left. So highest point, top left, bottom right is lowest point. This gives you an example of what we do, and this is what all requirements are associated with USGS typically when you're doing hydroflattening. Again, on the right-hand side, just making sure that your water body that's 2 acres or larger is at a single elevation for the entire thing. So again, looking at bare earth LiDAR with no hydro brake lines, this is typically what you're seeing within your water bodies. We have triangulation going on within flat water bodies, as well as we have some oddities within the actual drainage here. So typical requirements would be to flatten those out. So we've actually flattened those out pretty well to make sure that there's no undulation within those water bodies. And then the final one here is what we show for hydro enforcement. So I'm going to click back just to kind of show you that same image without hydro enforcement, and maybe pay attention right here where there's an actual culvert. As I go into hydro enforcement, what you can see there is essentially there's a cut line is put into that terrain to allow for water to essentially flow through there. Typically, hydro enforcement is being used for H&H modeling, right? I would not use this type of data set in hydro enforced DTM to do any type of contour, any type of other groundwork, because really we're artificially cutting a line in the terrain to allow for flow of that water through the terrain. So just something to think about in terms of terminology. There's been a lot of confusion in the industry over the years between hydro flattening and hydro enforcement. Making sure you understand what the difference is there is very important. All right, so should you collect more brake lines? That's always a question we get asked. Okay, yeah, we got the hydro brake lines, but should additional brake lines be captured? And it's dependent on what your requirements are. We see people, say, yeah, we want 50-foot rivers and streams instead of 100. We see people asking for smaller lakes and ponds down to 1 acre, for example. We also have customers that are looking for additional brake lines beyond that. I would tell you that in general, LiDAR does an amazing job in terms of modeling the ground. And so typically where we do see struggles with LiDAR is going to be in the hydro areas. So our recommendation most of the time is that there's not a significant amount of brake lines that need to be captured beyond what's being done for the hydro. But we do review this, especially if there's contours being generated. We do review those contours against the surface to determine if additional brake lines need to be added. So one thing to think about when we're thinking about LiDAR is it's a great tool to review against the hydro data sets that are out there. There's been a lot of discussion about this within the USGS and with the vendors, and really saying, okay, how do we take the existing NHD type of data sets and use LiDAR to reposition those data sets and make them more accurate, and even add additional flow lines if needed. So what we're seeing right now, there's a pretty big push by a lot of water districts and other entities to actually want to move forward with what they consider a more localized NHD related type of data set. If you haven't worked with the NHD in the past, I would highly recommend it. It's an amazing data set. I kind of equate it to a linear referencing transportation layer for water, to be able to essentially drop a drop of water at the top of a watershed and kind of see where it would flow all the way down through basins is pretty amazing, and have it all tied out and networked is really what the powerfulness of the NHD tool is. And the LiDAR data sets are only going to enhance those over the years. So. All right, so we'll talk about DSMs. We talked about DEMs quite a bit. DEMs, digital elevation models. DSM is another representation of this, which essentially is all the points within the data set. So you can see this here. This is what we typically would see for a digital elevation model, and this is what we would typically see for a digital surface model. The difference being there in this case is that the vegetation is included within the surface model. Automatic vegetation extraction is a capability that a lot of people are looking for these days. You can do canopy height models, you can do vegetation point clouds, 2D and 3D different polygon data sets. So again, just another derivative product to think about if you need those type of data sets for your GIS. 3D building extraction, I talked a little bit about this already, but we've done quite a bit of this work over the years. Again, a lot of customers are saying, hey, we just need the 2D, but when they see the types of detail that you can get actually from the wireframes and from LiDAR, this is an intensity image with a wireframe sitting over the top of it. These are the actual LiDAR point cloud with the wireframe sitting over the top of it. And then you can see the building outlines here with the point cloud over the top of it. We can generate these in GIS or CAD formats. It is an automated process, so I would say it's not as clean as your traditional photogrammetric approach. However, it's so much more efficient that typically what we're seeing is that customers are satisfied with this 80 to 90% accuracy, because the cost is so much lower than what we traditionally saw from a 3D modeling that would be hand digitized. So these products are pretty cool to work with. Again, as I mentioned, we've done a pretty nice project for the city of Boulder so that they can actually see what the solar envelope was for every structure within the city, with the ideology of potentially trying to get off the grid at some point for the public utility. All right, so contours is another derivative product that most customers are interested in. To be honest, I think as customers continue to use LiDAR data sets and surfaces that are provided, more and more people are realizing that they would prefer not to work with contours. I see contours as being somewhat of a legacy data set at this point. However, every customer just about we work with has interest in developing contours from the data set, so we still provide them, even though they're really a derivative 2D representation of a 3D product. So there is a lot of things that you have to consider when you're looking at contours, the noise of the data set, because there's so many more endpoints from LiDAR, you know, filtering that data set down to a point where you can actually have smoother contours is important. And then the hydro flattening obviously is very important as well. And that's what's being shown here on the left is no hydro flattening and no filtering, no smoothing. On the right, we've smoothed it, we've taken out the bridge, we've hydro flattened, and this is what the contours, this is what people typically are looking for when you're getting contours. So again, contours from photogrammetry versus from LiDAR do look different even after the smoothing algorithms. There's just a lot more nodes within the LiDAR data set, so a little bit more noise within the contours when you build it from LiDAR, but still a great product to deliver. All right, so business cases for LiDAR. It was interesting, I was at a presentation, I think last year, and one of the users, the end users in the community stood up and presented a slide like this. And I don't expect you to read every single list here, but you know, there's a ton of business cases for LiDAR, and that was the kind of emphasis of this slide. So thinking about what your specific requirements are is great. One of the things that we see is when you start getting a list like this, it gets a little bit noisy and it's hard to focus on what the real use cases are and what the ROIs are going to be for those use cases. So distilling that down to your, you know, top 5, top 10 is always important in our opinion, but having a longer extensive list is always good to show people saying, hey, you can use it for all these different things. If you're not currently using it for this, think about what you can do with it. All right, so suggested LiDAR machine specifications. Sorry about that. Let's go back. So ArcGIS 10.6.1 or above, ArcGIS Pro, this gives you some ideas of different software that we would recommend. LP360 is a great tool. That's an extension to these tools. 3D and spatial analysts are very interesting. You know, the RAM, the CPU, the hard disk, the video card all play a role in this. So if you're going to be doing a ton of LiDAR data processing, these are kind of the minimum requirements that we would recommend. These are always evolving depending on what the density of data sets that are being delivered are. But if you have any questions about this, we'd be happy to provide that feedback to you. This is something that a lot of people don't think about is, okay, I got all this great data, but I can't use it because I'm using a $500 laptop that doesn't even have a video card that gives me the capability to view the data set. So, you know, making sure that you have the tools to work with the data is always important. Estimated size per 1,000 square miles. So this gives you some understanding of the types of size you're dealing with from a QL2 versus a QL1. So something to think about in terms of space and storage and things of that nature. Larger projects obviously are going to have quite a bit of space used up by these types of data sets. All right, I would open up to questions, but I think we don't really have the ability to do that through this. So I think I finished up right on time or just over time. Jameson, if I'm correct, we were going to give a little bit of bio break here, and then we would start up at 10 o'clock to do the workshop and let you jump in and actually do the workshop stuff.
Sounds good.
I think, Jameson, you have the ability to unmute folks if they want to ask questions.
Where is the unmute?
I'm going to stop share here for a second.
Doesn't look like
Yeah.
doesn't look like I can mute or unmute them.
Yeah, it was letting us do it this morning. Let me poke around in here and figure it out.
You guys can, I think they can chat too, is that correct? They could send a question to the chat if they'd like.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not seeing any messages now, but we'll give everybody a break for now, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. I'm gonna go get a bottle of water. I'll be right back. All right, Jameson, I think you're good to go.
Alrighty, let me share my screen.
And Jameson, we might want to make sure people are familiar with that FTP just one last time, in case they join late. So.
Yeah, so the FTP you should be able to join. So it's going to be under our public, and if you go down, it's going to be the Elevations Geospatial Summer Series. And this is going to be the data. And so this is going to be our adventures using ARC for LiDAR. And so you can see here that these are the workshop documents, and this is going to be the PDF that Jason had referenced earlier. And then these are going to be the two data sets that we're going to be using. So it's going to be Atlantic City and Antrim. So you should be able to have all the LIS files, the shape files, intensities, break lines, and then same thing for here. You're going to have all the break lines, intensities, outputs, and stuff that I'll be demonstrating throughout the rest of the day. And it's about 10, 12 gigabytes, so it might take a little bit of time to download, but it's all going to be there, and it's going to be all the same data that I'm going to be going through in the next 3 hours. So if anybody has any issues, you can raise your hand, or Jason can unmute you, and we can kind of go that route. But if everybody can see my screen, you can see here that this is going to be the agenda that we're going to follow today. And so this first part here, the LiDAR overview, is the presentation that Jason just did. And so the product creation and geo processing, both in this section and the next one, is going to be something that I do, as well as the data visualization that we're going to do towards the end of the day. So this first part here, we're going to basically go through what is an LIS data set and how to create one, how to use 3D break line constraints in LIS data sets and terrains, basically how we're going to take the intensity LiDAR point clouds and turn them into a black and white aerial photo. The differences between a DTM, DEM, and a DSM, and how to create them. What is a hillshade and how to create it? What is a canopy height model, and the variations between buildings and trees and gaps and such as that, as well as the feature extraction, specifically building feature extraction from the Atlantic City data set. And then once we get back from lunch, we're going to talk about how to do break line creation. So those are going to be your streams, your rivers, you know, airports, culverts, stuff like that. The various different terrains and how to create them, the difference between model key points versus contour key points, how to create various contours, play with them a little bit and make them what you need them to, and then exporting the LiDAR data to various different vector or raster models that you need. And then the data visualization at the end, we're going to talk about creating profiles in 3D using ARC. We're going to do point editing in case you need to edit LiDAR data itself. We're going to do a view shade analysis, and then the RGB fusion, which is what Jason showed in his presentation. We're going to basically take everything and give it a color and merge it together to give it an aerial view, but it's going to have 3D data for it. So we're going to start with what is a LiDAR, or what is an LIS data set? So an LIS data set is it's basically a data set used to store and reference one or more LIS files into a binary format. And so this is a standard format storing LiDAR airborne data. So if we go into our ARC catalog, we're going to go to Atlantic City. We're going to go into our LIS, and we can see we already created one, but for purposes of showing you how to do it, you go to New, you go down to LIS dataset, and you create a new dataset. And so we're just going to call this one Atlantic City. And then you can either choose to right-click properties, or you can double-click on it. And then this pulls up a file inside the properties. And so from here, you're going to go to keep this as file, and we're going to basically add, sorry here, we're going to add surface constraint, or not surface constraints, files, sorry. So you can add files here, and this is where you're going to navigate to. So if we go to our live folder, and we go to Atlantic City, and we go to the LIS files, we can add these here. So Control A, and you hit open, and then it adds that. And then you go to the X and Y and Z coordinates. So basically this is to validate that you have the correct coordinate systems for the LIS data sets. So because you're adding the LIS files, it should hold the headers. So you should have no problem with this. And so because this is Atlantic City, you can see that it's going to be a NAD 83, New Jersey, that's correct. And because it's in the US, it's a NAV 88 height, which is in feet, which is correct. And then we go to statistics, and you want to update statistics. So you hit the update button here, and then you hit this. And it, well, because I already loaded it, but basically it'll run that. And then you go to, and then that's your creation, and then you go to these statistics, and this is basically what you're looking at. So it's going to have your classified as unassigned, ground, building, bridge decks, everything that Jason had went through. So you hit OK. And now you go to your, and now we're going to create an intensity image. So you're going to go to New, LIS, and you're going to do intensity. And from here, you're going to go Files, Add Files, and you're going to add these again. So these are going to be the correct ones. And now you're going to go to surface constraints. And so these are going to be your feature classes. And so these are your 3D brake lines. So typically a vendor will provide hydro brake lines used for creating DTM products from LiDAR processing. These hydro brake lines are also created so that the DTM has a flat surface for water bodies and the monotonicity flow for a river with elevations equal to the bank to bank for a river. For our USGS partners, projects, there'll be bridge brake lines that will be added and removed based on tinning where the bridge crosses. So if we go, now that we're in ARC catalog, we're going to go to add, and we're going to add a surface constraint here. So let it load. And we are going to go to live, Atlantic City, and we're going to go into the brake lines. And so inside this hydrography data set, we're going to collect bridge brake lines and hit OK. And then we're also going to add the ocean as well. Now it's important that you can see here that we have a hard line for the river brake, for the bridge brake lines, that is correct. But for the oceans, we need to change the soft clip to a hard clip. So if we remove this and we do oceans, and then we change this to a hard replace, that is correct. And so now you have the constraints. And so now you go to these statistics and you update. The statistics now have been updated. And so now you hit OK to save your, yes, to save your statistics. And now we're going to open up into the ARC map. And so this is going to be a blank map here. So when we go to add data, we are going to add, we're going to go to the LIS, and we're going to add the LIS data set. And so let's see, we don't want that one, we're going to want this one. So this is your LIS data set. So you can see here that we have a 0%, which is why nothing is showing. But if we zoom in to usually about 1 to 1500, you can start to see the point clouds, and the LiDAR is actually starting to produce. So these are the various different buildings inside of Atlantic City. And so right now we're going to double click on the LIS data set, and we're going to go to filter. And from here, we are going to choose the first return button. So that basically gives us a best option for making intensity images. And so we're going to hit OK with that. And then inside of our ARC toolbox, which is going to be right here, we are going to go into conversion tools. And we're going to go to raster, and we're going to collect the LIS dataset to raster tool. So we're going to choose our LIS dataset, and we're going to change this to intensity for the Atlantic City. And then we're going to keep the value field as elevation. And we're going to keep the cell assignment type as average, but we're going to change the fill void to simple. Now we're going to go down. We're going to keep these as float and cell size, but we're going to change this from 10 to 3. So depending on the spacing of your data, the value of from 2 to 4 times is usually acceptable spacing. So we usually split the difference and just do a 3. And then we're going to hit OK. And this should run out. And I've already produced all of this just so we didn't have to wait. And so this is going to be the creating of the intensity image. So you can see here that this created a grayscale of the actual LiDAR itself. And so these are your LiDAR data sets. So this is the LIS in elevation form. So you can see that all the various different buildings and plots are visible. And then if we wanted to look at the intensity of the actual LiDAR folders themselves, these are the actual images themselves into a grayscale. And so what you can see here, the red is what you're looking at. These are the actual no data. And so if there's too many areas with no data, you want to rerun the intensity image to a larger cell size. But for this, you can see that the no data here is the red, that they're basically in the water themselves. And so that's okay, just because the LiDAR doesn't reflect the water as well. But if you wanted to change that to where when it comes up, you'll see basically you go to display or symbology, and when it comes up, you'll have no color. And so it just comes up as white. So if you ever ran an intensity and didn't understand or didn't know what the no data was, you just go straight into the symbology and the layer properties, and you display no data as red or whatever color you want. And then that shows you where the no data is and tells you if it's an acceptable intensity image or not. Okay, so now we're going to go into DTMs, DEMs, and DSMs. So a DTM is a digital terrain model, a DEM is a digital elevation model, and a DSM is a digital surface model. So what are the differences? A DTM is a LiDAR ground terrain with a brake line constraints added to the surface, and when you get the USGS delivery of the data, you get a DTM with other brake lines that could be added if needed. So a DEM, which is a digital elevation model, is just the ground with no brake lines, and a DSM is just the first returns. So the outputs of canopies and other tall buildings and grounds, depending on what the first return hits. And so we're going to do a canopy height model earlier or later, and that's going to be a DSM or a DEM. And so to create a DEM, we're going to go into our toolbox here, and we're going to select the sorry about that, the from raster. So we're going to do conversion tools. We're going to do to raster, and we're going to do the LIS data set to raster. And as it loads, we're going to choose the, we're going to do this. We're going to go to this one because it'll give you a better model. So we're going to choose the Anturum LIS data set. let it load. Some of these data sets are quite large, so sometimes it takes a little bit to load. Sorry about this, folks. Frozen at the moment, sorry guys. Let me.
It's always fun with the live workshops, right?
Oh yeah.
I can throw in some jokes here if you want. How do geographers find the person they're going to marry? They date them.
Oh gosh. On that note, we're back and running. All right, so we loaded up the interim LIS data set. And so we saved the output raster to DEM. And we're going to make sure that we have the ground only. So inside your filters, it's now checked as all. So we're going to make sure that it's chosen to ground. And so that'll change that to just displaying the ground. Now inside the interpolation type, we're going to keep the average, but then we're going to change the linear to the nearest neighbor. And then we're going to go down and we're going to leave the float and the cell size the same. But we're going to choose for the sampling, we're going to do 2 instead of 10. And so we're going to hit OK, but for purposes of not getting frozen again, I'll just hit cancel because I've already ran it. And so for the DEM, we're going to have, this is what you're going to see. So this is basically the output for the DEM. And so you can kind of see here that you have the elevation changes, but you don't really have a lot of else going on. And so if I remove the terrain, you can kind of see a little bit going on here, but not really. It kind of just shows the ground only, not much ton of detail for everything in the middle. And so you'll see that we have an airport here, but you can't see it in this. And so if we go to a DSM, we're going to hit the LIS to raster again. And we're going to use the interim data set as well. And then we're going to change this to a DSM. We're going to keep the elevation the same. We're going to change this to nearest neighbor. And everything stays the same. This goes back to 2. The only difference is that we're going to change this filter to first returns. And so we hit OK with this. It runs out. And then this is going to be your DSM. And so you can kind of start to see now that you can see the ebbs and flows of valleys and rivers and streams, and you can start to see buildings. You can start to see the airport itself up here, and you're getting more detail as you go. And so, and as you can also see, the difference here is, so your DEM, the low is going to be 590 feet. Your height is going to be 927 feet. And then for the DSM, your low is the same height, but your height is about, 80 feet higher. So you get a lot of the extra detail that comes with it because you're not just looking at the ground at that point. And so to create the DTM, we're going to basically do the same thing. So we're going to do the LAS data set to raster. But the difference is if we go into ArcMap, we're going to go to Interim, not live, workshop. Go to LAS. We are going to make sure that we add the surface constraints. And so basically the same practice is going to be basically that we add the surface constraints. So we're going to go to the GDB, inside your break lines, hydrography, and you're going to select the bridge break lines, the rivers and streams, as well as the lakes and ponds. And so when you add these, you want to make sure that, we'll just do the lakes and ponds. You want to make sure that, for the lakes and ponds, it's going to be a hard replace, but for the bridge break lines and the rivers and streams, it's going to be a hard line. And so because those are already added, we're good to go there. And then if we go back to ARC, we want to make sure that these are turned on. So if we go to the LAS data set, we double click on it and we go to surface constraints, you can either clear them, which means that you have them inside the actual data set, but they're not being used at the time, or select them, which means they're actually going to be a 3D constraint that the DTM is going to use and create off of that. And so because these are on, you're good to go. And so you hit the LAS to raster, you use the data set. You keep the elevation the same. We're going to change this to a DTM. We're going to change the linear to a natural neighbor again. We're going to go down. The float and the cell size stay the same, as well as the sampling value. So it's going to be 2 again. You hit OK. And now you'll see that the DTM, it has a little bit more data. So there's a little bit of a difference. So you can kind of see that there's a little bit more going on, and you have different values and all that stuff. So now that we have the DTM, we're going to use hill shades. And so using the actual DTM itself, we're going to go to the 3D Analyst tool up here, and we're going to select the raster surface, which is going to be right here. You lower the button and you go down to Hillshade tool. You hit the DTM. This is going to be your hillshade. You're going to keep these the same. So the altitude and the azimuth are going to stay the same. The Z factor stays the same. You just hit OK and that runs out. And then this is going to be your hillshade. And so you can see here that this is the actual hillshade of the data set itself. And so if we were to load in the intensity images for this, just to give you a reference, this is what the actual terrain looks like. So you can see that we have an airport here, you have your water bodies and your rivers right here, and then you have all the vegetation along with it, and then you have the, you have your valleys and your stripped earth here. And so if we were going to compare that to the hillshade, you can kind of see that these are your water bodies, these are your stripped earth, and then this is the airport itself. So now we're going to go to a canopy height model. So inside of our spatial analyst, so if we clear this out and we go all the way down to spatial analyst, we're going to want to go to map algebra, which is a tool that allows you to use the raster calculator. And so from here, we're going to use the DSM. So we're going to select the DSM and we're going to subtract it from the DEM. And then we're going to set the output raster as our canopy height model. And so we're going to hit OK, but this one takes quite a while to run. So because I've already ran it, I'll just show you the output. And so this is going to be your canopy height model. So this basically shows all the areas where there are canopies, whether they're buildings or trees or vegetation above a certain extent, whatever the case, this is the different canopies. So what can we do with this raster? Well, we can see the highest points and where the lowest points are. So those are going to be stripped earth or brush. And so how do we create a tree area polygon? Well, we have to reclassify the canopy height raster to, using various tools inside the 3D Analyst. So if we go to 3D Analyst and we go to raster reclass and we hit the reclassify tool, we're going to input the height model here that we just created. And we're going to keep the value the same. And now we're going to click the classify button. And you can see here that we have natural breaks, and there's going to be 9 classes. So what we want to do is we want to change this to 2 classes. And for this instance, we want to keep it at 3 feet. So that's going to be our buffer to the height of the tree. So anything above 3 feet, it'll collect. Anything below, it'll keep as an opening. So we're going to change this to 3 feet. But in terms of keeping it as meters, we're going to do 9. So we hit 9, and then we hit OK. And now you can see that we have 2 values, 1 and 2, and no data. And so we're going to basically hit OK, and this creates the raster output, but that being already created, so we're going to do the, this is going to be the reclassify. So now you can see it's broken down into anything that's below or above or below 9 meters or 3 feet. And now we want to do an output raster to a reclassify. And so we're going to do raster to polygon, which is going to be inside of our conversion tools. So if we go out of here, and we go to conversion tools, and we go from raster, we do raster to polygon. We select the classify that we just did. And we leave the value the same, everything stays the same. We change this to, raster reclassification to polygon, which is what it's named in here. You leave the simplify polygons checked, and then you hit OK, which is what we created here. And so now you have roughly, let's see, I believe it's like 1.4 million polygons broken down into whether they're a tree or a building canopy, or whether they're an opening or a gap. And so you can kind of see it's loading. And I'll load these up once it's done. And so you can see here that this is the differences. And so if we right click and go to attribution table, let it load a little bit. You can see now that it's broken down into, the FID and the ID are going to be auto-populated by the ARC software itself, but the grid code now is broken down into the 1s and 2s, which is what we did for the natural breaks. And so now we basically need to figure out where the canopy openings are. And so based on that, if we go to the attribution table again, we want to know, what the grid code 1 and 2 is. So 1 is basically going to be the canopy openings themselves, and 2 is going to be the tree canopies. And so what we want to do here is, you can see that these are all 1s, but there's 1.4. So usually ARC kind of keeps it low key in terms of it's auto-populating, so you only see 1 if there's a ton of features. And so if you go to selection, select by attribute, and you do grid code and then equals 1, you can hit apply. And you can see here that we've selected 1.1 out of the 1.5 million features. And so now it's highlighting all of the canopy openings that aren't the tree canopies themselves. And so once that loads, We're going to hit the data, export data. And we're just going to, and you can either choose all features, selected features, or features within a certain extent. And you're going to choose selected features because those are going to be our openings. And then you select the output folder. And so for this, we're going to do workshop. And we're going to do it in the outputs. But we're going to change this from file in personal geodatabase to a shape file. And so you can see here that we already have one set up. And so that's going to be your canopy openings. And you hit save at that point and it'll export it. So we'll go ahead and do that. And so to unpopulate, and then these are your canopy openings. So like I said, this is basically all the features that are below 3 feet or 9 meters. And then what if we wanted to select the tree canopies themselves, then we would basically just change this from 1 to 2, hit apply. And then it selects the $300,000 and change of features. And then at that point you do the same thing. So you do, you do the data, export data. You select the correct folder, and then you would just change this to canopies, because this is actually the building and tree canopies themselves. And so this is going to be the canopies. So quite a few less features. And so you can see here all the stripped stuff. So the stripped earth here and the airport itself, it didn't collect any of those. But there's a ton of little sections of gaps between the trees that we don't want. So we're gonna have to select anything greater than 500 square meters. And so if we do the canopy openings and we go to the attribution table, it's already been created, but we're gonna do add field, and you add it, and you add in the size, and you change this to double, and you hit OK. Then you get the size, and then basically you right click on that and you do the calculate geometry. You want to make sure that it's the correct area, and then you hit square meters, and you hit OK, and then basically it'll run it out to anything that's square meters. And if you wanted to select by an attribute, you're going to do you're going to change this to canopy openings. You're going to do size. You're going to do greater than, and it's going to have to be greater than 500. So you hit apply. And right now you have 200 out of the 1.7 million. And so I've already created this. And so this is going to be your openings greater than 500 meters. And so you can kind of see here that everything small has been eliminated, and everything big are just going to be the big swaths of land that don't have canopy coverage. Alrighty, and now we're going to do building extraction. So if we go back to Atlantic City, we're going to go to the layer properties for the LIS data set. And we're going to go to filter, and we're going to choose the classification code of building and ground, and we're going to hit OK. And then we're going to go back to the conversion tool from raster, or to raster, sorry, and we're going to do LIS data set to raster. We're going to choose the Atlantic City LIS data set. The elevation stays the same. We're going to change the linear to natural neighbor. But this is going to be the actual buildings themselves. So this is the building surface. So we change this to building surface. And we're going to go down. the float stays the same, the cell size stays the same. The only thing that we're going to change here is it's going to go from 10 to 1 for the sampling value. We're going to hit OK. That runs through. That one will take a little bit to run. And so if we do the building extraction, this is going to be your building surface. And so you can see here that if this is our LIS, you can see that it collects everything. So you have ground, you have roads, you have everything, and but just the building surface just has the pier here and the various different buildings. It removed everything else. And so we want to do a raster calculation to basically subtract the building surface from the DEM surface. So if we go down to I believe it's spatial analyst, and we go to map algebra, we do the raster calculator. We're going to choose the building surface. We're going to subtract it from the DEM, and then select the output raster to the correct location that you want. And for this purposes, we'll just change it to buildings. And then you would hit OK. Again, this one will take a little bit to run, so I've already ran it. And so this is going to be your buildings. And so you can kind of see here that now it's given all of the buildings. And so this is going to be you don't see a lot of this stuff. It's kind of blacked out. And now this is specifically just the building canopies themselves. Okay, and now we want to reclassify them to 10 feet. And so if we do a reclassify, which is going to be up in the 3D analyst, and we do the raster reclassify, and we choose the LAS data set, or sorry, the building surface, or the buildings, sorry. We're going to keep the reclass the same, so it's going to be the value. And we're going to hit the classify. And now you have the natural breaks again. And so if we change this to 2, and we change the feet to less than 10 feet, that would basically give us anything. It would remove anything less than 10 feet. And so this changes the method to manual. You hit OK. And then you have a building reclassify. So if you wanted to reclass building, and then you hit OK. Or you change mission values to know, so you check this, and then you hit OK. And then the reclassification is this. So you can kind of see here that you have the buildings themselves and the surrounding stuff around it. And so because this is part of the actual, it collected this, so we'll have to remove this later, but because inside the actual DEM and everything, the piers were connected to the buildings themselves, and so we'll have to remove the shoreline here. But these are your various different buildings. And so we want to so again, we want to convert that raster to a polygon. And so if we go to conversion, and we go from raster, and we do raster to polygon, we're going to choose the Atlantic City building reclassify. We're going to do raster to polygon buildings, whatever you want to name it. This simplify polygon stays checked. You hit OK, and then now this is going to be your raster to polygon. And so you can kind of see here that you have the various different polygons, and they're all going to be their own individual thing. And so what we want to do here is we want to select, so now it's broken down into, the same type of thing that we did for Antrim. And so we have two GR codes now. So we have 1 and 2, and we want to select out the grid code 2 to export the buildings. And so if we do select by attribute, and we choose the reclassify, we do the grid code equals 2. We apply, it selects out 3,800 out of the 12,000. And then we're going to do the data export. And we're going to save this as a shapefile again. And so if you go into the actual folders themselves and you do Atlantic City, you go to outputs, change this to shapefile, you can see here that we have a building shapefile already created. And so you hit OK, and then you can see that this is the building shapefile. So let me go ahead and remove these. So these are our building shapefile. Now the river and the oceans are now gone, and all you have are the buildings themselves. And so now, you know, part of the agenda, you know, I can start on the break line creation now, or I can hold off until after lunch. But that was the, you know, the first section here.
I think we should just stay with it, right? These are 45-minute sessions with 15-minute breaks. Obviously, we have this lunch in between, so I think we should end it now and then start up at 1 as planned, if that works for you.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that.
Is there, I mean, we have a few minutes here, so if there's any questions, if you want to put it in the chat or raise your hand, we can try to address them. I'll remind you that everything that Jameson is going through here, we've documented in a pretty extensive PDF that you can download through the FTP. So even if you don't download the data, I would highly encourage you to download the FTP, the PDF of the steps to do each of the different things that Jameson is showing today, because I think it'd be instrumental to have that in the future if you need to reference back to it. Obviously, the video will be available through Elevations as well. So. I'm not seeing any questions. Maybe give it a couple more minutes and then we all can go have some lunch. So.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
We can, Jameson.
Okay, so for this second session, we're going to kind of break down and show examples of what a break line is and how to create them, as well as how to drape them from 2D to 3D space. We're going to talk about the various different terrains, how to create them, and then the differences between a tin-based or LiDAR terrain compared to a contour terrain. We're going to talk about model key points versus contour key points. What are the differences, what to look for, and what you can see between them. And then we're going to talk about contours, how to make them, the various different ones. And then we're going to finish up the session talking about exporting and extracting LiDAR data, as well as reprojecting it. So to start, for break line creation, we're going to go to Anturum, and so this is the same area that we were working with before, but as you can see, we have 2D polygons collected. So the different color schemes, and so your bridge break lines are going to be kind of a railroad tie type of color. Your single streams are going to be a pink stream, a pink line with an arrow depicting the direction of the line. Your lakes and ponds are going to be hollowed out yellow polygon, and then your rivers and streams polygons are going to be a hollowed out blue one, and then your airport is going to be red. And so you can see that we haven't collected any single streams or any of the airport yet. But as you can see here, this is going to be an example of a lake or pond that's been collected off of the LiDAR LAS data sets. And so this is the intensity image. So if we were to turn that off, and this is the LiDAR LAS data set, you can kind of see that it's been collected and it's been categorized. There's no tinning, there's nothing going on. Everything is basically stripped, and so you can see that this is a water body. It goes up to the shorelines, and the shorelines match the polygon itself. And so if we were to zoom out, you can kind of see that we have a lake here, and we have a lake up here, and then we collected the river polygon connecting the two. And so this one is going to be this one's going to be collected from bank to bank like the other one. And so you can see You can see here that we haven't monotonicityed or hydroflattened the river yet, so you can kind of see some tinning along the way. And so this is a little bit of overhang here. This goes along the coast and it's collected, and so you know, and then basically we clipped it to each extent of the lake and pond. And so if we were going to look at creating a single stream, we're going to want to basically take the intensity image, which are these right here, and we're going to want to make them transparent or semi-transparent. And so if you double click on it and you go to display, you can see that as a whole you can change everything from a brightness to a contrast to a transparency based on percentage, but we only need a certain select few of them. And so we're going to look for the 1163, and we're going to go to display, and we're going to do transparency to 40%. We're going to look for the 1164. We're going to go to transparency and put it at 40%. Same things for 1219 and 1220. So now you can see that these two are not transparent, but these four are. So you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a dullness to them. And so now if we add in the LIS data set and we zoom in, this gives you the ability to not only look at the intensity image to see the actual image itself, but now you can actually look at the elevations based on the LiDAR data sets as well. And so this is kind of a key for us to collecting if we're going to be doing it manually, because you can kind of you know, quality control yourself as you go. And so with that being said, we have the airport and the single stream already loaded up. And so if we go to editor and we edit the file database, enter in break lines, and we hit OK, you can see that we have a create feature now. So we can create features for the airports, the ponds, the single streams, the rivers, whatever you want to do. But we're going to focus on the airport for right now. So if we zoom into this area right here, you can kind of see that it's an airport apron kind of with, you know, buildings or structures or hangars along the way. And so if we turn on the LIS data set, you can kind of see the distinct outline of the asphalt itself. And so what we want to do is we're going to do the airport. So we're going to click on the airport, and we are going to just collect this apron itself right here to the extents. As you can see now, it's been collected to the extents, and you want to make sure that you're at 100%. So usually, when I say 100%, I mean right here. You want to zoom in to make sure that everything is 100% in terms of the data set. And so you can see that the percentage is being displayed as 100%. Anything less, you might miss out on some subtle details or elevation changes, and you might be collecting on something you shouldn't. But for this purposes, I'm just kind of showing you what things are. So if we were to pull this up and double click on it, you can kind of see an edit vertice toolbar open up. And so if you go to sketch properties, this will open up, and you can kind of see that we have the X and Y coordinates for all of the vertices along the way, but we have none of the Z. So in order to turn this from a 2D feature into a 3D feature, we want to use the interpolate shape tool. So if we go to the toolbox, and we go to 3D Analyst, and we go to Fractional Surface, which is going to be right here, and we go to Interpolate Shape, you'll see that you can input the surface, which is going to be our LIS data set. We can import the feature class, which is going to be our airport. And then we want to output the feature class into the same database to make sure it's correct. And so we're going to go to interim, we're going to go to break lines, and we're going to just select airport, and we're going to put 3D. That will delete it, and then you want to make sure you check this box right here, which is the interpolate vertices only, because if you don't do that, then it's going to basically it's going to put vertices where it sees fit, and it might change the overall dimensions of what you just collected, or it might change it completely and it won't be correct anymore. So if you check this box, it only we call it drape, but it'll only apply an elevation to the vertices that you collected yourself. And so you hit OK. And then it exports as that. And so now you can save your edits. And you can click on this now, and this is the new Antrim 3D airport. And if you hit the same sketch properties, you can see that we have the same X and Y's, but now we have a Z value attributed to it. And so it's going to be draped to the ground of the LIS and the LiDAR that we used for it. So if we now go to a single stream with that, streams are a bit tricky because you want to make sure that you collect downstream just for monotonicity. When I say monotonicity, I mean it has to flow downriver, and all of the elevations have to not dramatically, but slowly trickle and get lower and lower. You don't want to have spikes in elevations, or you don't want to have elevations going lower, and then all of a sudden you have an elevation that's higher even though the river's still flowing downstream. And so we always collect them upriver to downriver. And so you can see here that we have a river outlet here that's connecting these two water bodies. And we have this little stream that is feeding into the larger river. And so if we want to collect this little stream, we're going to turn on our LIS data set, which is going to give us the correct elevations and the changes so that we can see it. And we're going to select the single stream Antrim feature class. And if, let's just say we wanted to start here, we're going to have to zoom in so that we have 100%. And so we start collecting down the river. And in situations like this, when you start getting into a river or a stream situation to where you can't completely see where the river or stream is going to be going, you can turn off your intensity images and you can just follow the lowness of the elevations. So that's like a perfect situation right here, because you have overhang of vegetation and you don't quite know. You can see that it connects down here, but you don't quite see which way it's going to go. So you just follow the lower elevations until you get out of it, and then you can select your intensity image and you can just follow it all the way down. And like I said, it's important that you go downstream, so you start upstream and then go downstream. So this is another situation to where you need to follow the lowness of the LIS data set. And follow it all the way through. And then you get to right here and you can see that it's connecting to the larger water body. So it's important that you take this line and you just put it right in the middle of the ending right there, and you finish it. And as you can see, if we were to double click on the feature itself and pull up the sketch properties, we have all the X and Y's again, but we have none of the Z's. And so one of the important things for this is when you're collecting rivers or water bodies, you want to make sure that your constraints are on. And so if you double click on the data set and you go to constraints, you can see that we have the rivers and streams, the lakes and ponds, and the bridge break lines that are already applied to the LIS data set, which makes it easier to kind of see because it cuts into the LIS data set for things that are created. So the reason I hadn't done that yet is because we didn't have any streams yet, and so it wouldn't have cut anything. That's the reason why we're doing it, because it's going to cut the actual LiDAR itself to the extent of the stream and give you a better overall product. And so we want to do the same thing with the interpolate shape so that we can get the Z. And so if you go to interpolate shape, which is going to be in your 3D analyst tools and your fractional surface. You double click on it. You're going to choose the interim LIS data set. This time you're going to choose the single stream. We're going to change this from the default database to the hydrography feature class that we already have. And so we're going to find the single stream and we're just going to put 3D on the back of it. We're going to hit save and we're going to make sure that we check the interpolate shape, interpolate vertice only. We're going to hit OK. And now you can see that there's a new stream here. So if we wanted to, you can go down and you can click the arrow at the end. You can change the actual width of it if you wanted to. And if you wanted to have a specific color, you could turn it to yellow or whatever you want. And so by clicking on that, you can see now that we have the X and Y like always, but now we have the Z information going down as well. All right, and so the bridge break lines, I'll run through these real fast. We only have 4 collected in this feature, in this data set, but you can see here that because we did a constraint, you can see that it cut through the LiDAR. And so this is going to be a larger water body. And so this is going to be your lake or your pond that was collected. And then this is going to be the river that's either coming into it or coming off of it. And so we needed to use the bridge break lines to basically hold that river and allow that water to go through without causing extra tinning or dropping the actual elevation of the bridge itself. And so you can see here that we collected the bridge break lines along the edge where the bridge is suspended and where the bridge and the ground meet. And so you can, if I were to turn these off, you can see that because we did the constraints for the bridge break lines, you can see that it's cut through and this will hold the bridge in place. So it's not actually tinning as a final product when we send it to the client. I'll show you a different example. So same situation as here. So you have the river itself going through, and so this is the actual river. So this is where the bridge and the land meet, and so you can see that because we did the bridge constraints, it cut through the LiDAR for the bridge. And so if we were to, just to show you a difference, if we were going to remove these constraints, it's gone now, so you don't see any of that. And so when you do the LiDAR, there's going to be, there's going to be elevation changes below and water and stuff, and so it's not going to reflect very well. So that's why we do that. So if we go back to the constraints themselves and select all, you'll see that now the rivers and streams hold it, and then you have the bridge itself. And so usually this is where the bridge starts. And so you have the bridge held up here, and then you have the roads on either side, and that keeps it from tinning, and that allows the water to go through. So based on that, because we've collected what we had and we did the bridge break lines, we're now ready to do a terrain because we have everything in place. And so if we go to the 3D analyst, so let's just go ahead and save these, stop editing, remove this, create features, we'll put that over there. And if we go to the actual thing and we go to 3D analyst and we go to conversion, we'll do from file and we'll do LAS to multi-point. And so basically you have 2 options here. You can either choose to use a folder, which will just give you the folder that's housing the LAS files, or you can choose files. I usually like to do files just because I can guarantee which LAS I'm going to be using and make sure that I'm using all of them. And if there's anything else in the folder, it's not going to cause a problem. So I will go down to workshop. We're going to go to student data. And we're going to do interim, and we're going to go to LIS. And so if you hit the type here, it will organize everything in terms of the type of file that it actually is. And so these are your pyramiding files, these are your LAX files, and these are the actual LAS files that you need. These AutoCAD right here. So if we were to select all of these and hit open, it loads all of them up. And then you're going to want to set the output feature class to your feature class. And so I have already collected it because it takes quite a while because there's quite a few mass points. And so you just do mass points, you hit save. For this case, yes, because, and it's blacked out here because there's already, so we'll just do 3. And so for the average spacing, we're going to do 1. And then at that point, we're going to do the input class code is 2, which is what Jason had said earlier, class 2 for LiDAR is just going to be ground only. So we hit the plus button and that brings the 2 down. And then we're ready to go. We hit OK. And then the output is going to be this. As you can see, there's quite a few points. And so basically what this is doing is it's taking the LIS files and it's taking all of the various points that were collected. And so Jason had mentioned that there's, you can do 1 million points per second. And so it's taking all of those points and it's turning those points into a mass point feature class that's basically collecting all of those individual points and giving them an elevation, giving them a purpose, and then you can build things off of that. And so, it takes quite a while. This is why I had ran it out before, because it'll take about 20 or 30 minutes for this to run through if you are actually processing it. And so what you're seeing here is the gaps in the mass points. And so these right here, these are going to be your rivers and your lakes and all of that stuff that was already collected, because the final LiDAR had removed those. And so that'll basically filter through.
Hey, Jameson, while we're waiting, I think it's worthwhile to mention that, normally this Esri environment and the workflows that we're showing you here, this isn't traditionally what Sanborn would use as workflows for our production environment. We have some different software applications and whatnot, but the intent of the presentation obviously is to, try to provide some workflows in case you have to do some of your own editing or adding break lines and things of that nature. So most of our customers are using ARC, and that's the reason why we were showing it and demoing it through this tool. So
yeah, usually to create what we're creating here, there's other software suites that'll do it a little bit more proficiently. I know that the geoprocessing and the steps along the way for Esri and ARC is a little labor intensive, but it gets you there. It's just not the way that we do it normally. And so because the LIS had finished out, now we're going to basically create the terrain. And so I've already created the terrain, but so if you were going to go to new and you want to collect terrain, and so you want this to be hydro terrain, that's fine. And then you're going to select the mass points. You're going to select the bridge break lines. You're going to select the boundary itself, which is going to be the boundary of Antrim. And then you're going to do the lakes and the ponds, as well as the river and streams. And so you're going to choose the average spacing of 5. You're going to hit next. And then you're going to then you're going to see these, this is going to be the same kind of constraint thing that we were dealing with the LIS data set. And so with the mass points, you want to leave that as mass points. With the bridge break lines, you want to leave it as a hard line. The boundary itself, that's fine. You can leave it as a soft clip, but for the lakes and ponds, you want to change this to a hard replace. And then for the river and streams, you want to change this to a hard clip. You're going to hit next. You're going to hit, yeah. Yeah. Well, you're going to hit next, and then basically you're going to pull up to a screen that's going to allow you to calculate the perimeter or the pyramids and the properties. And so you're going to collect that, and then you're going to run it through, and then you're going to see this is going to be the hydro terrain itself. And so it creates a terrain based on the mass points and all of the surface constraints. So like basically it takes into account for the ponds and the lakes and the rivers and all that, and the airport apron that we did. And then it'll basically cut those out, flatten them based on the elevations that we've applied to them, and then you'll get this terrain. And you can change the classes of them. You can change the elevations, the colors, whatever you need to do for them. And from there, we're going to go into the contour key points and contour lines and all that. And so what's the difference between a model key point and a contour key point? And so if we load this up, these are going to be your ground points. So when I said mass points, these are all the various different points that you're going to get from a LiDAR and LIS file. And so if we go down, these are going to be your model key points. And so these are going to be like kind of a thinned ground, and they're very randomized. So they're not very accurate, but they're used more for like a prettiness look. So they're more smoothed out. They look a little better. They're not as jagged, and you don't have them all over the place. Whereas if you go down to a contour key point, these actually follow the contour intervals based on the spacings and the LiDAR points themselves. And so you can kind of see that this follows the contour lines, and you can kind of see that there's not randomness to it. There's some systematic reasoning for the spacings of them. And then here you can kind of see the green points are going to be the model key points, and the blue points are going to be the contour key points. And so you can kind of see there's just randomness all over. And so if we go back, you'll kind of notice for the model key points and the contour key points, there's some randomness, but there's settings for them. And so usually for a model key point, you're going to have a setting of a point every 100 feet. And there's going to be a tolerance based on half a foot or half a meter or whatever you choose it to be. And like I said, it's going to be based off of the prettiness. And so it looks pretty. So 100 feet is basically just used for the smoothness. And that's kind of what you see in topographic maps. And then the contour key points themselves will be based off of like a foot or a 2 foot or a 3 foot interval. And then they're going to have a tolerance of 20 feet. And so that'll basically remove a bunch of inconsistencies, and it'll give you more of an accurate, it just won't look as nice. And those are both based off of ground, the ground only, because we built the terrain off of those. And so that's kind of your difference there. So when we're creating contours, we're going to go to we're going to go to 3D Analyst, and we're going to go to raster surface. Or sorry, we're going to go to we're going to go to raster surface, and we're going to do contours, and we're going to pick the raster as the DTM. And so we've already created that from the prior session, so we can go ahead and use that. The output feature class is going to be the contours themselves. So if we go back into that brake line feature class, you can see that we created the contour raster there. And so I'll just put 2 to make it go. The contour interval is going to be 2, so you can tell that these are contour key points, not model points. And then the Z factor, we're going to keep the same. And then we're going to hit OK. And so when we hit OK, this is what you're going to come out with. So these are all your contours. And so I will remove the terrain. And so these are all of your contour key points. And so you can kind of see that they're not as smooth. They're kind of all over the place, really. But when we go to a full ground, we're going to do a surface contour. So we're going to use the terrain. So we're going to go to 3D tools, 3D analyst tools, and we're going to go to the triangulated surface, and we're going to do surface contours. And we're going to use the terrain itself for that. And we're going to change this to surface, or full terrain, sorry. So this is going to be what you see here, full terrain. So we'll just change that to 3 so it runs. The contour interval is going to be 2 again. And then we're going to change the index interval to 10. And then we're going to hit run. And then basically that's what comes out here. And so you can kind of see that this is the difference. Pretty much the same, but a little less. You get a little bit less of the jaggedness, and it's more smoothed out. So you can kind of see that green is going to be your raster, and purple is going to be your, purple is going to be your full terrain. And so it's basically giving you the full terrain, and it's not as jagged. And then we're going to go to import the contour key points. So we're going to do conversion, and we're going to do the 3D analyst, and we're going to go to, like I said, conversion. We're going to go from file, and then we're going to do the mass points again. To multi-point, and we're going to collect the file again. So we're going to do the PRK, and so we have these here. So we're going to select these, Control A, open these up. The output feature class is going to be PRK. And so as you can see, we already have that. And so we'll just put a 2 there. The point spacing is, we're going to do 1 for the point spacing. And then we're going to change this to 8. And then we would hit OK, and that would run through. It would take a little bit of running. And then this is going to be this is the mass points for the same area, but we're using different mass points. And so this took out all of the unnecessary stuff. As you can see here, the newly created airport apron is gone as well. So now we're going to do a terrain based on the PRK and the boundary buffer. And so if we do a new terrain, so we're going to go here, we're going to do a new terrain, and we're going to call this one contour terrain. We're going to call it 3, but this time we're going to use the CKP, and we're going to use the bridge break lines. We're going to use the buffer here, and then we're also going to use the lake ponds and the river and the streams. The distance is going to be 1 instead of 5 this time. We're going to go next. Okay, we'll just do this. It's because I already created one. We're going to do PRK, bridge break lines. And then it's going to go to here. And from here, we're going to choose the mass points, the hard line. The buffer is going to be a soft clip. The hard replace is going to be the lakes and ponds. And then the river and stream is going to be the hard line. And then we're going to hit next. So the Z minimums, all that's fine. We're going to go to next. We're going to calculate the pyramids, and you can see that we have a window size, and so it's broken down into 6 categories. And then this is the maximum scale to look at it. So we have to go into 5,000 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 to look at this stuff. And if we hit next, you can see that all of this is collected. And if we were to collect it, or we were to start the terrain, we would hit finish, and it would run through. But I've already created it just because it takes a little while. And so this is the contour terrain. And so this is the new one. So it's more of the same, but you're just looking at a different contour classes for that. And then we're going to do a surface contour to create those. And so if we go to surface contour under our triangulated surface, we're going to choose the contour terrain. And we're going to change this to the anterum. So the output feature class is going to be this one right here. Hit OK. The contour intervals is going to be 2. And then we're going to change the index intervals to 1. And if we were to hit OK, that would run through, take a little bit of time, and then this is going to be the updated contour lines based on that raster terrain itself. And so now we're going to do an extract of an LIS and a reprojection. And so if we go back to the Atlantic City data, so this is the data that we had been working with before. We're going to do the extract LIS, which is going to be more or less it's a clip of the LIS files based on like a boundary extent or a tile grid itself. And so for this, we have the Atlantic City LiDAR index. And so this is what we collected. This is what we collected for the actual LiDAR itself, and that's what the LiDAR is the boundary is going to be clipped to. And so if we go to the 3D analyst tools, we go up, and then we go to the data management, and we do the LIS data set, we can go to extract LIS, and we're going to choose the LIS data set, which is the Atlantic City. The target folder is going to be whatever you choose it to be. So for this, we're just going to choose it to be the Atlantic City output. So we're just going to choose output. And then we're going to change the process extent to the as specified below. And that basically just keeps it to the specified length and extents that we had for the LiDAR itself. So we're just going to choose the boundary. So it's going to be this LiDAR. So that's going to be the as specified below. So it's going to basically be built off of that LiDAR index. And so here you can choose a name if you'd want to. So we're just going to change it to Web Mercator. Okay. And then we're going to keep the rearrange LIS points as checked. And then we would run OK. And that basically outputs this LIS into the extent of this this extent that is the LiDAR index. And so basically it's already cut to that, so you can kind of see these are the extents. So it was already cut to it. You know, when we had done this, we had already did it to the extent. And so now we're going to do a reprojection. And so the easiest way to do this is if we go to environments. And I've already set this up. So if you choose the current workspace as the output, which is what we just put the clipped LIS files to, and then we have a Scratch workspace, which is going to be the new one. So inside the actual outputs, we're going to have a reprojected folder, which is going to have the correct, the new projection that we put. So you can see here that this is the Web Mercator that we had chose. And so we keep this as specific as below. And then we're going to choose this little finger with a button here. And the easiest way to do this is if you just go to Web Mercator and you just search for it, and you look for it, it'll pull it up as a projected coordinate system. You select it, boom, and then if you wanted a graphic transformation, which is what we're doing because we're basically taking it from projected to graphic, you can choose all the different ones that you want, and so for this you go down and we've already chosen the NAD 83, so you can just go all the way down to the NAD 83. (1983). And you can select it when it's here. So it's going to be this one right here. And because I've already done that, you remove it and it already adds it. And then you hit OK and it reprojects that clipped LAS file to the from projected to geographic based on the NAD 83. And so basically that is the section for the creation and geoprocessing. And so I can jump into the data visualization if you'd like, or if you wanted to take a 15-minute break, we can do that as well, or if you guys have questions.
Why don't we take a little bit of a break? Jameson, I don't know if we need to do the full 15 minutes, but maybe give it 5 minutes and then we can get back on at 1:45 or so.
Okay, works for me.
And I'll be on here the whole time, so if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand or put it into the chat.
Okay.
We'll probably end up getting done a little early, I'm guessing, Jameson, right?
Yeah, the data visualization portion, it's pretty interesting, but it should go fairly quick.
Okay.
So.
All right, Jameson, do you have an understanding of everything about geographic information systems?
I believe so.
You do, really?
Yeah.
I would answer no. I just have a gist of it. GIS gist, right?
Oh, God.
Another bad joke to start the last session.
My gosh.
Yeah, I know you like those.
Oh, yeah. Those are like dad jokes at its finest.
Yeah, that's what my kids say for sure. All right, I think we can finish it off with the data visualization stuff, the cool stuff, right?
Yep, the cool stuff. So this is kind of the fun stuff. So if you guys have downloaded the data and you guys wanted to kind of partake in this is kind of the fun stuff because it's using like the 3D software inside of ARC and you can kind of see things in profiles and you can kind of do the RGB fusion that Jason had touched on this morning. But we'll kind of go through creating 3D profiles do point editing in case you need to edit like a rooftop or the ground or something if it's been misclassified. We'll kind of go through a view shed analysis and what that is, and how to basically run the geoprocessing for that. And then we'll go through the RGB fusion so that you can create like a 3D ortho basically. So we'll start on the creating profiles. And so we'll load up the data visualization. And so right now, all you're gonna have is just the Atlantic City LAS data set. And so if you just click on this X and Y, it says it's the go to the X and Y. And so this gives you specific coordinates. And so if we wanted to go to this specific coordinate, and then the Y, that'll put us right here. And so you can kind of see that something's going on here, but you don't really know what, just because this is 2D, this is 3D software and a 2D lens. And so if we go to the profile here, so if we go to LIS, this is again like your LIS data set toolbar. And so filters are going to be all, which is what you want. And then these are your pan up and down, but this is going to be your LIS profile. So if you click on this, you get a little plus sign that comes up. And so you draw a line from here to here, and you can expand out. And then this gives you a profile. So now you can kind of actually see that it's a Ferris wheel. And so the cool thing about that is you can kind of go up and down, and you can zoom in and you can see the profile. And so Jason kind of touched on that this morning about, whether it's, 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the quality. And so extreme quality here, and you can kind of, you can do whatever you want. You can kind of go to this one, and you can see the various buildings. So this is your ground, this is your rooftops, and you can toggle between, but this is going to be your Ferris wheel. And so you can kind of see that now. And if you click the 3D button, which is going to be right next to it, this creates a 3D view of the LIS data set. And so this gives you a 3D view of it, and you can kind of zoom in and up and down. And so this gives you all of the different elevations in terms of the pier itself. And so this is going to be your ocean here. This is going to be your shoreline, and you can kind of toggle into that, and you can see the different structures. And so you can kind of see how much larger the actual Ferris wheel is going to be compared to the structures around it. And so these are your rooftops. This is the ground itself, and then the pier. So that's kind of neat. And then you can zoom in and out of that. And if you want to go to this, so we'll zoom out. And we're going to select this building right here. So if we just draw a line, we zoom in, draw a line, and we go across. You can see that this is the actual ground here. This is the side facing of the building, and then this is the actual rooftop of itself. And so you can measure height of this. And so you can see that, by moving up and down, you can see the various heights. And so you can go all the way down to 10 feet. You can always go all the way down to negative. And so you can kind of tell by zooming in, you can tell the height is 480 feet. That's the actual building, and that's kind of how we, you can QC the LiDAR data from this too, if you wanted to, have a 3D model created of it or something like that. You can use this to verify the actual height of it, and that way that you're correct. You're creating like the 3D meshes and the 3D models to the correct scale. And so you can kind of see here that the box itself, and so this is the vertical line, and then this is the horizontal line. And so as you zoom out and you move down, you can see that the line is moving with it. And so it basically tells you where the height is. And so this is really good for 3D modeling, because you can actually use it to see the exact heights and see where things are, and you can create models to scale. And so we're going to do point cloud editing. So We don't really do this very much because once you change it, you can't really unchange it. It's done for good, and if you mess it up, then you mess up the entire area that you're working on. And so we don't do it too much. But inside of our profile view, so we're going to do ground only for the filter. So that'll tell us what's right and wrong. And so you can kind of see here that everything is pretty uniform except for this. And so you know something wrong is going on here. So if you draw a line to right there and you zoom out, you can see that something's wrong. And so we'll zoom into that. And so if you hit the select button here, you can select as much as you want or as little. And so you can see that when you unselect them, they go back to brown, which is going to be ground. And they, you can select them and they go to the teal color, and that's how you know that they're selected. And so you know that this is not correct because ground is here and it's at 12 feet. And ground is here, it's at 34 feet, so that doesn't make sense. And so if you were to select these, and then you hit this little button right here, which is your edit, you can actually change the code on these. And so because our filter is only set to ground, we will, if we change this to, let's just say unassigned, we can hit apply, and then that goes away because we're only looking for ground. And so if we change the assigned features to unassigned or building or whatever the case, it'll get assigned to that. And so for that instance, you can do that one. And then we'll do, we'll go to this one as well. So this takes us right here. And if we go to all, this will give us the building that we want, which is going to be this one right here. And so if we do a vertical profile of the building itself, you can see that the brown is going to be the ground itself. The red is going to be the height of the roof itself, and then the multicolored red and yellow is going to be the building facing. And so you can see here, if we zoom in, that these right here are miscollected because they're supposed to be collected as the roof. And so if we do that and we change it to unassigned and we hit apply, it changes them from what they were. And so like if we wanted to do, if we wanted to change them to ground or whatever the case, we can change them there, and then you'll see that they're now brown. And so like we said, we don't really try to do this very much because if you change them and it changes the actual point clouds themselves inside of the LAS, and it's not really a good practice because if you're changing too much, then you're messing with the data.
Yeah, I guess one point there, or message there, is if you're planning on editing kind of the definitive data source, it'd highly be recommended that you have a second version or keep some level of versioning control so you can keep the original. So there's no question about the authentic source of the data itself. It's rare that people would want to change points, but you may have, my mindset is you may have a workflow where maybe you're looking at a very small subset of the LiDAR point cloud for maybe a small engineering project or something like that. And maybe there's something in there that you've identified that is causing some concerns. And so it gives you the ability to do some minor edits if you want to do that, but definitely wouldn't plan on editing the base data set that's provided. That would be of concern. So.
Yeah, and it's definitely tricky because, you know, he had mentioned that there's millions of points, and so if you start changing points here and there, it's kind of hard to go back. So now we're going to talk about a view shade, a view shed analysis. So eventually, a view shed analysis is basically just a raster surface that shows the visible locations for observer points. And so what we're doing for this is we're going to be looking for observation points from hotels or casinos or whatever the taller buildings going out to the coastline is going to be. And so if we zoom out and we go back to Atlantic City and we do the view shade analysis, you're going to have two things. So we're going to go back to the Atlantic City DSM that we created back in the first session, and then we load in the break lines for the hotel locations, the break lines for the sight lines to the ocean, and then we're going to load in the oceans themselves. And we're going to use all of those for the actual view shed analysis. And so what you see here, this is actually the view, this is the end product, but this is the ocean itself. So it's going to be a hollowed out, I'll move these down. Hollowed out polygon. So these are the coastlines here with the piers, and this is the ocean out to a certain extent, and then the ocean inland here. And so these are going to be the hotel locations for the different hotels. And then these are the viewpoints based on the elevations and the heights of buildings around them. And so what we do here is we go to spatial analysis, which is all the way at the bottom. And we're going to go to surface. And we're going to go to view shed. And so for this, we're going to load in the DSM. And then the observer points are going to be the hotel locations. The output raster is going to be whatever you want to call it and wherever you want to store it. So this doesn't have to be in a GDB or anything like that. So we'll just leave it as the DSM 11. And then we, everything's good there. And then we hit OK. And then it runs through, and this is going to be what you see. So right here are all of your, this is going to be the DSM, which is based off of the buildings themselves. And so you can kind of see that the view shed has kind of corrected these. And so these are the different views that you can see. And so this is the, what you're seeing here is the pink is going to be not visible. The green is going to be visible. So the visible is everything that you can see from the rooftops of these buildings. And so these people can see back and they can see this way, but they can't see, they can't really see to the coastline past the pier. And so you can kind of see here, if you're on the pier, you can see all the way out to the ocean, but inside these actual buildings, you can't actually really see because of the height around them. And so that kind of shows that. And so if we wanted to remove the not visible to a different color, you go to properties and you do color as null. And then that gives you basically just the unencumbered view of what people are looking at. And so you can see that this person can see, or these hotels at the rooftops can see this way and this way, but they can't actually see, you know, directly to the coastline itself. And so now I want to do an above ground raster, which will basically show a view shed from everything above. And so if we go to view shed again, and we do the DSM, and we do the hotel locations, and then again we just you can do that to an output raster wherever you want, and then we're going to do the output raster for this is the view shed parameters, and so you can choose to do an output raster wherever you want. And so for this we'll go to Atlantic City, then the outputs. And these are all the different ones. And so you can choose, we'll just choose the above ground there. You hit save. And because it's already there, it's not going to let me. But now it is. And then you're good to go. And if you were to do that, you hit OK. And then this is the above ground. And so I will do the sight lines in the ocean. And so now this is basically just the sight lines that you can see from those locations. And so this gives you a pretty good barometer of what people are looking at. And you can kind of see that somewhere, you can see the sight lines of, this basically depicts the sight lines of the rooftops and stuff like that. So you can kind of see these are the sight lines for the view shed itself. And then we want to go to the RGB fusion. So if we go to our catalog and we go to the toolbox and we do 3D Analyst Tools and we go to Data Management and we do LIS Dataset and then we do Colorize LIS. Here you pick the dataset itself. So if we're doing Atlantic City, do the data set. You're going to do the image as the, we have the imagery here, and we're going to choose this one right here. So this is going to be your intensity image, your mosaic image. And then we're going to do the RGB, which is red, green, blue, and the bands are correct. The target folder is going to be, we're going to do the target folder for here. And then we're going to outset the LAS data set to that. So we've already done that. So it's already there. These are all of them right here. So we can just, we can hit RGB. And then if we go down, these are going to be all of your LIS. Those are, you're going to change this one to 7. You want to keep that as no compression. Keep the rearrange LIS points as checked. You're going to hit OK. And then you're going to load that into ArcScene, or you're going to basically open up ArcScene. And this is a finished product, but you're going to right click on the properties and you're going to go to the symbology tab and you're going to add one, which is going to be, you're going to add the attribute group to unique symbol. You're going to hit OK. And then basically that loads it as the RGB. And then you hit OK. And then it creates, so if you were going to just do an LIS data set, I'll load that in as well. So this is just the LIS data set in 3D view. And so you have the specific colors based on the classification. So red is building, blue is water, and then you can kind of see that this is the missing data here, whether it be because of waves or sun angle or whatever the case, but you have your bridges, you have your land, your coastline, and all that stuff. And then as the RGB was fused, you get the actual color and extent of the actual, LIS itself. And so you can kind of see it in 3D view based on the mass points that we had created before. And so this is the coastline with the with all of the different colors fused into it. And so this is kind of more or less what he was talking about this morning. So that's pretty much all that I had. If anybody has any questions or wanted me to run through anything else, I can absolutely do that. That's not a problem. Or if you wanted me to touch over something else, or if I missed something, you can raise a hand or whatever and let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Jameson. I'm wondering if we should maybe one last time throw the FTP stuff into the chat so that if people still haven't had a chance to copy that over, they can do that.
Okay.
We'd appreciate any feedback that you guys have. If you do have feedback, especially after looking at the documentation and running through some of this yourself, if you find value in it, and if you have questions about how we did things, we'd be happy to answer those now, or at a later date if need be. So. So again, what's located on this FTP location is going to be, I don't know how many pages it is, Jameson. I think it's probably 20-page document that kind of goes through step by step everything that Jameson went through today.
It's
It also
about,
has the sample data that we used in the demos today, so you can download those sample data if you'd like. That includes, I believe, both imagery as well as the LAS files. And that should give you quite a bit of data as well as instructions to play with if you so desire. So.
Oh, Jameson, I think you only shared that with panelists.
oh, sorry about that.
Looks like it says all panelists on my side.
Yeah, so that'd be me and you.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I did that once this morning
Yeah.
already.
So we'll probably leave this FTP up for a few weeks. So if you need a little time to download it, that's fine. But then we'll end up taking the data offline at some point down the road. So. And Patty, I see your email there in reference to software applications for larger projects. You know, so there's kind of two different ways to look at the use of LiDAR, right? There's the producers of the data sets, which Sanborn is a producer of, or a prime contractor with the USGS, as well as have many other contracts. And then there's the entities that use the final products for their daily business needs. For us internally, in terms of production environment, we do use Esri a little bit for a couple items, but for the most part, we're working within MicroStation, LP360, and a few other platforms primarily. We also use GeoQ for data management. The reason why we don't necessarily recommend those tools for the end users just because of the cost that's associated with those software packages. It can get quite expensive, and they're really geared towards more large volume data processing companies. So obviously Esri, I think, does a great job at, it's gotten a lot better over the years, obviously, at consuming the LAS files. And because most of our clients are working already within ESRI, it makes a lot of sense to kind of demonstrate the capabilities of ESRI. But there is some other tools out there that you may want to investigate. You know, there's a global mapper that has, I believe, a LiDAR extension that's actually a pretty decent tool. LP360 also, I believe, has a standalone desktop application that's not an extension to ArcGIS. So if you're looking for something as an alternative to Esri, those are two that I would take a look at. James, I don't know if you have any other feedback other than that.
Yeah, because we use MicroStation for a lot of it, and then when we're doing like hydro collections. So when I broke down the break line collection and all that for the rivers and the lakes and all of that, we use Esri as well as the LP360 extension for part of that to collect it, and then do the monotonicity and hydroflatten and everything to make sure that everything is good. But the actual production of the LiDAR is done in MicroStation or Global Mapper or something like that.
Yep. So Patty, hopefully that answers the question there. All right, any other questions?
Do you guys want to maybe share your contact info in case someone thinks of something later?
Yeah, we can do that. I wasn't sure if you guys already are doing that in terms of our email addresses, or if we just want to put them into the chat. We can do that as well.
It can't hurt. I think we will be sending out contact info, but if you want to share it here, that'd be fine.
Okay.
And then of course, everyone has my email address that's on the call today. So if you need to get a hold of Jason or Jameson, I'm happy to share that info too. Cool. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank you both so much. This was very informative. I was supposed to be working today, but I couldn't stop watching your screen, Jameson.
Well,
So
good.
yeah, really well done. It's very interesting. I don't get to work with LiDAR very much, so I'm excited to see all the progress they made with tools and whatnot. So thank you both. And I wanted to just remind everybody before we jump off the call, we do have our second Elevation Social tonight. Pete McGee and I hosted the first one a couple weeks ago, and tonight it's going to be YGeo is going to be your host. So hopefully we will see you there if you want to grab that information out of the chat. I'll hang out for a few minutes if you need some time to copy and paste that into a notepad or something. So thanks everybody for your time today.